The clock was ticking nearly 2 a.m. when Jack, a New York City taxi driver, finished his shift. It was a March day and there was a lot of snow. He felt every bone in his body beg for rest as he maneuvered his taxi through the busy city streets toward his home. The headlights of the cars in front of him seemed to blend into a jumble of blinding lights, and the constant hum of traffic echoed in his ears like a tiresome mantra. His life was parked in that same rut: drive, drive, drive. It seemed that nothing had flowed beyond this for many years. The night had been especially eventful, with an endless succession of races and impatient customers, and Jack couldn't wait to get home and indulge in his well-deserved rest, but rather, he intended to stop at a trailer for a bite to eat before bed. With a sigh of relief, he finally spotted a quiet alley and parked his taxi there, turning off the engine with a muffled snap. The place was about 300 meters from there, and with all that cold, a walk would not be bad. Jack stepped out of the cab, feeling his aching muscles protest with every movement. The snow was falling relentlessly, but it was a welcome respite from the sultry heat inside the vehicle. He adjusted the worn cap over his head and ran his hand over his tired face, collecting drops of sweat mixed with urban dust. The lights of the distant poles barely penetrated the dark alley, creating ominous shadows that seemed to move at the slightest movement. But Jack was not easily intimidated. He was a veteran of the streets of New York, accustomed to their peculiarities and dangers. With determined steps, he began to move away from the taxi, eager to get home and finally rest. As he walked down the dark alley, Jack could feel the tension of the night seeping into his bones. Every shadow seemed to hide a dark secret. Every noise whispered an untold story. He wondered how many lives had passed through there, how many dreams had been broken in the hidden shadows of the city. But Jack had no time to ramble on about these dark thoughts. Her focus was on the journey to eat and also on returning home, where she hoped to find comfort and peace after a hard day. However, something caught his attention and interrupted his thoughts. At the corner of the street, dimly lit by the distant poles, stood a lonely figure wrapped in dirty rags. It was a beggar, his dark silhouette highlighted against the gloomy background of the alley. Jack paused for a moment, watching the man with curiosity and compassion. He knew he couldn't just ignore someone in need, especially amid all that snow, even after a long day at work. With a resigned sigh, Jack approached the beggar. His sudden presence seemed to surprise the man, who raised his tired eyes to meet it. The faint glow of the distant lights reflected in the beggar's eyes, revealing a mixture of despair and resignation. Jack felt a tightening in his heart as he saw the worn expression of the man in front of him. "Hey, buddy, need some help?" Jack asked gently, trying to hide his own exhaustion under a mask of compassion. The Lord looked at him for a moment, as if assessing whether he could trust him or not. Then, with a hesitant nod, he muttered, "Some food, or a ride to a warm place. It would be nice." Jack nodded, understanding. He couldn't just leave this man on the street, left to his own devices. "Well, come on. I'll take you somewhere where you can rest a little and eat something." With a grateful nod, the beggar got up with difficulty and followed Jack, carrying all his belongings in a small shabby backpack on his back. During the short drive to a small restaurant that Jack knew well, the two men exchanged few words. The gentleman, whose name he did not even know himself, seemed reluctant to talk about himself, or even confused about everything, pocketing the words and halting the thoughts in half. While Jack respected his privacy and because of fatigue, he did not insist too much on that confused dialogue. Jack guided to a small diner that he knew well. The atmosphere was cozy, with wooden tables and the comforting aroma of fresh coffee hovering in the air. As they walked in, Jack noticed how uncomfortable you looked, as if you weren't used to places like this. He wondered what his last memories would be before he found himself lost on the streets of New York. They sat at a distant table, away from the hubbub of the few customers present at that hour of the morning. Jack studied the tired face of the Lord in front of him, trying to find clues about his identity or his lost past. But he seemed as lost as Jack felt about him. Then, "Do you remember how you got here?" Jack asked, trying to start a conversation, but also hoping to find answers to his own questions. The Lord shook his head slowly, his eyes lost somewhere beyond the walls of the diner.
"No."
"Dunno. My memories are all jumbled up. I can't remember how I got here." The answer perplexed Jack. How could someone just forget their own identity? It was as if that fellow was a riddle, a lost puzzle piece that Jack couldn't fit into his mind. "It's strange. I know I lived somewhere else, it wasn't here, but I can't remember anything else. I don't know where I came from or where I'm going," he said, his voice heavy with frustration and despair. Jack felt a pinch in his heart at the sight of the Lord's suffering. He felt that he could not simply abandon this lost and helpless man. He needed to do something to help him, even if he didn't know where to start. "Don't worry. Let's work it out." "Well, I'll order some sandwiches for the two of us," Jack said, determined not to let face this journey alone. As the two men ate and Jack tried to decipher or discover something more of the Lord, amid the cozy atmosphere of the diner, he felt a sense of determination grow within him. "Well, since you don't remember his name, can I call you Frank?" "Frank?" he asked. Can, maybe. Frank's good. Frank was my father's middle name, Edward Frank, he said with some pain. After the comforting meal at the diner, Jack and Frank stepped out into the frosty evening air. The cozy atmosphere of the restaurant had brought some comfort and normalcy to Frank, but Jack could still see the shadow of confusion in his eyes. He wondered what else was hidden behind Frank's amnesia. "Well, where should I leave it? Today is not a good day to be on the street. Leave? Leave me with the others." Jack looked at him confused. He didn't know who the others were, but he said to accompany him. On the way, they would find a good place to spend the night. As they headed for the cab, Jack noticed how out of place Frank seemed in that urban world, as if he didn't belong in the hustle and bustle of New York City streets. It was as if he was lost in a dream from which he could not wake up, trapped in a limbo between the past and the present. "Have you had an accident? Do you have any documents?"
Accident? No.
"I don't remember. I have nothing. I have only my clothes and covers for the cold." "It's cold today, isn't it?" Yes, pretty cold," he replied with some frustration. Jack opened the cab door for Frank, and as he drove through the dimly lit streets, Jack tried to calm Frank's agitated mind as he thought of somewhere to drop him off, but he couldn't remember any shelter in that area. And as he tried to converse with the Lord, asking questions, trying to explore his mind, he realized that finding answers would not be easy, that it would take time and patience to unravel the mystery of his lost identity. "Frank, I know it can seem scary not knowing who you are or where you came from," said Jack in a firm, reassuring voice. Frank looked at Jack, a mixture of gratitude and confusion in his tired eyes. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you." Jack smiled, and while he was looking on his cell phone for some shelter or something, he kept trying to talk. "Frank, what do you do for a living? Do you have children?" "I remember children, but a while ago, there were a few." With a determined nod, Jack drove through the streets of the city, leading Frank towards the unknown. And as the taxi broke the silence of the night, and also of the snow that seemed to thicken more and more, Jack rethought what to do. "Well, Frank, I don't think we have many options. Everything's already closed around here. I'll leave you here in front. There is a shed. Maybe you can take shelter there. Do you have a lot of covers in that backpack?" "Oh yes, I have in the shed. Maybe, it looks good." Jack followed the car a little further, Frank riding beside him, his gaze completely lost, as if nothing mattered to him anymore. What had brought him to this point, lost and helpless on the streets of New York? Jack knew the streets could be unforgiving, especially for those on the fringes of society. He finally stopped the car, feeling a tightness in his heart as he imagined the difficulties Frank must have faced. "So, Frank, here we are. Do you think you can turn around for the night?" "Oh yes, I can. Thank you." As soon as he opened the door, a gust of icy wind entered the car. Jack swallowed hard as he closed the door again and walked slowly under the balcony, where he would be protected from the snow. Jack started the car again, thoughtful as he heard the engine rumble. His eyes followed the beggar, who still followed oblivious even to the snow that fell on him. Then he sighed, seeming lost in painful memories, and opening the window shouted, "Hey Frank, wait. Get in the car again. I'll take you somewhere safer and warmer." The beggar looked back and began to go again towards the car. "What did you say?" "I said I'm going to take you somewhere else, somewhere warm and safe. It's very cold today." "Oh yes, thank you." "Thank you," Frank said, getting back into the car. And so Jack started up again, while commenting with the Lord. "Life is funny, you know? You think you have everything under control, and then suddenly everything falls apart." Jack's remark somehow resonated with Frank, who seemed to smile, a distant smile. He had experienced his own share of challenges over the years, and although he didn't remember them very well, he knew it resonated with himself. He listened intently as Jack shared snippets of his story, revealing a life marked by unimaginable loss and hardship. In a moment of tense silence, Jack looked at Frank with a mixture of sadness and recognition in his misty eyes. "Frank, life is full of cruel surprises. Sometimes the people we love disappear without a trace," Jack said, his words echoing in Frank's mind like a distant echo of the past. He continued, as if venting, "I lived in Connecticut. Well, Me, my brothers, and my parents. I was still young when, well, my father was a hardworking and dedicated man, an exemplary employee, and although we didn't have much, he provided the best for my mother, my brothers, and me. I was about 17 at the time when he left for work one morning and never came back after that. We did not understand anything about what happened. We were very worried and soon the police were after him. They worked with various possibilities since he had left, but we refused to believe it. He had never given any reason to distrust him. They even investigated some possible crime. At the time, I was still unable to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. But as the days went by, the cruel reality set in. My father was missing, gone without a trace. That completely destroyed our family, Jack continued, his voice faltering slightly. My mother never recovered from that loss. She spent years looking for him, but never found anything. And me, I became a stranger to myself, lost in the darkness of uncertainty. The lack of my father, a reference for all of us, and even the distrust that it had caused us, the feeling of abandonment, but at the same time, thinking that he could have been the victim of a crime. It was painful. Being the older brother, I had to start working. I had become the man of the house, and my mother had fallen ill with all that. It was terrible years. She continued, holding back tears. It was the first time he allowed himself to vent about it with someone. Perhaps because the person next to him could not remember things, it brought him a certain peace when telling him intimacies, since Frank would not remember anything. Meanwhile, the passenger listened intently, though he seemed absorbed in other thoughts, but his feelings still existed, and he was gradually absorbing the palpable pain in Jack's voice. But with my mom barely, my siblings still young, so I decided I wouldn't let the darkness consume me, Jack said, a glint of determination rising in his eyes. I found a way to move on, to put one foot in front of the other, even when the weight of loss seemed unbearable. Work helped me forget that. Maybe the taxi was an idea so I could be out there, looking for some clue that my father had left. And this has been so long, more than 2 decades. He turned the wheel, steering the taxi down a less busy street. My mother, poor thing, could not stand it for a long time. She died only 3 years after Dad was gone. She was consumed by grief. Luckily, my brothers were already coming of age, and so I didn't have to help them for a long time. They soon managed to turn around, and that way we could each follow their lives. Now, every night as I walk these streets, I remember where I came from and how I got here, Jack said, his voice firm. And even though the past still hurts, I choose to look to the future with hope. The passenger nodded silently. As the taxi continued its way through the city, the snow outside began to recede, leaving behind trees and the street consumed by a thin layer of whiteness. And as the city lights shone in the distance, Jack stopped the car. Well, Frank, this is where I live. It's not big, nor does it have luxury, but it will definitely be better than spending the night on the street. Jack parked his taxi in front of a modest apartment building where he lived. He looked at the passenger next to him. Frank, you're going to be fine here for tonight, Jack said gently, opening the car door. Frank looked at Jack gratefully, his hoarse voice whispering sincere thanks. Together, they went upstairs to Jack's modest apartment. Well, this is where I live. Please come in. Once inside, Jack offered Frank a place to rest on the couch. He took a few extra covers to make sure the beggar was comfortable. Then he pointed to the bathroom, where Frank could take a hot shower and cool off. It's not much, but it's what I have. Take a shower, it will help you get better rest, I said, handing over the towels. While Frank walked to the bathroom, Jack went to the bedroom, where his wife slept. Honey, it's late. What took you so long? And asked, worried. Well, I brought someone I met on the street today. He was in need of help. Have you brought a stranger? Are you sure about that, Jack? It can be dangerous. She answered sleepily, but with some trepidation. No, worry, dear, it'll be all right. He's old and he needed this help. It's snowing a lot outside, and also, it's just for today. Tomorrow I'll find a place for him to stay. When Frank emerged from the bathroom, he looked like a new person. The tired features gave way to a more relaxed and serene expression. Before they retired to rest, Jack said goodbye to Frank with a warm handshake and a comforting smile. Sleep well, Frank. Get as much rest as you need. As Jack lay in his own bed that night, he reflected on how the past had shaped his compassion for his neighbor. He knew that life was unpredictable and that everyone deserved a second chance. And by helping Frank, he not only offered temporary shelter, but also renewed his own faith in humanity. His scars from his past would not be so easily healed, but either way, he carried with him the promise of a better tomorrow. When Jack opened his eyes the next morning, the soft sunlight was beginning to seep through the bedroom curtains. He stretched out and got up. ready to face another day on the busy streets of New York. But on that particular day, he had a mission. He wanted to take Frank to some shelter, some place that could welcome him and take care of him. As he made his way to the living room, he found Frank already standing by the window, lost in thought while contemplating the cityscape. "Good morning, Frank," Jack greeted, breaking into a welcoming smile. "Did you sleep well?" Frank turned slowly, his tired eyes now shining with a little more life. "Yes, thank you. It's a beautiful day out there," he replied with a shy smile. At this time, Jack's wife and also emerged from the room, rubbing her sleepy eyes. She looked at Jack and Frank curiously, immediately noticing the presence of the guest. "Good morning, Frank," and said. Frank nodded in response, thanking Jack's wife for her hospitality. Jack and him prepared an enhanced breakfast while Frank joined them at the table, eating some toast and also drinking some coffee. During the meal, Jack and tried to talk to the Lord a little more, but just like the night before, he still seemed quite disoriented. "I like coffee. Coffee is good." "Yes, it is," Frank said at one point. "Drink it ease," and replied. As breakfast drew to a close, Jack looked at and Frank with gratitude in his heart. As they finished breakfast, Jack exchanged a meaningful look with Anne. "I knew they needed to address the issue of Frank and his near future. And, dear, I'm taking Frank to a shelter this morning," Jack said, his expression reflecting concern mixed with compassion. "Why do you care so much about this? You know you have to work." "Well, it's that. I think it's the right thing to do. It's because of your father, isn't it?" "Yes, that's what I wish they had done for him. I imagine my father in Frank's place, lost, wandering around aimlessly. Maybe if one person had helped him, the ending would have been different," and nodded, understanding the importance of finding a more permanent solution for Frank. "Yes, I understand, dear. I think it's a good idea. He needs more than just a night of temporary shelter." Jack put his hand on Frank's shoulder gently. "You will always be welcome here, Frank. But we believe a shelter will be able to offer you the resources and support you need to rebuild your life." With this mutual understanding, the three began to make preparations for the day. Jack and helped Frank pack his few belongings, ensuring he was ready for the journey ahead. "Well, Frank, go with God, and take care of yourself," and said, as the two of them left the small apartment. As they drove to the shelter, the silence in the taxi was filled with a mixture of emotions. Hope for Frank's future, but also a twinge of sadness at the uncertainty of the future. When they arrived at the shelter, Jack accompanied Frank to the door, making sure he was received. They were greeted by a kind woman at the entrance counter. She greeted them with a cheerful smile, but soon her expression turned serious when she asked for identification documents. Jack looked at Frank, noticing the worry seeping into his face. "Do you have your papers, Frank?" he asked, his soft voice conveying support. Frank shook his head regretfully. "Me? I don't have them, Jack. Them? I think I lost them a long time ago. Without documents, it will be impossible to leave it here. The best thing to do is to run after the documentation before anything else. But can't they fit it in for a while? I'll try to help you with this later." "Well," the woman at the counter nodded understandingly before she started typing something into her computer. "Let's see what we can do. What's your full name, Frank?" "He doesn't remember, ma'am. He doesn't remember anything." "Well, in that case, I really don't know how we can help you. What if he has a general record?" asked the lady next to him, interrupting the conversation. "Maybe he's already taken shelter here or in some other shelter, and if that's the case, maybe we can find him." "Well, maybe, but how are we going to find him without knowing his name or anything about him? Do you know at least the age?" the other asked Jack. "No, I have no idea. He couldn't tell me. He remembers practically nothing." "Well, we can go by hunch. Maybe around 60 or 65. I'll play here. Man, 65 years old. We have a lot of records in our system. It won't be that easy, but let's check, if you want to wait while we check everything." While the ladies of the shelter checked Frank's record, Jack remained by his side, offering silent support. He could feel the tension in the air, but also a spark of hope that things would resolve positively. While they waited, Jack took the opportunity to talk to Frank, trying to soften the charged atmosphere with comforting words. "Don't worry, Frank," Jack said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "They will solve it soon. You will be in good hands here." Frank nodded, a slight smile forming on his lips. "Thank you." Jack returned the smile. As the shelter ladies continued to search the system, Jack and Frank remained close, sharing stories and thoughts about what the future held. Despite the uncertainties and the broken dialogue without conclusions on Frank's part, there was somehow a mutual understanding that bound them together in solidarity. After about half an hour, the silence was broken by the lady who called them at the counter. "Ah, here it is," said the lady at the counter with a slight sigh of relief. "Well, everything leads to the belief that we found you in the system. It was really difficult, without having a name or document." Jack felt a weight being lifted from his shoulders. "Thank you," he said sincerely to the woman at the counter. "We are truly grateful for all the help you are offering. Well, Frank, now they can take better care of you." "Yes, Edward Frank Jones, please accompany us. We will take you to a room." At that moment, Jack shuddered, as if he had been haunted by his own inner demons. The ghosts of the past that he had tried to bury so long ago came back and laughed. The memory of his father, gone without a trace, was an open wound that had never fully healed. "Wait," Jack said. "What's his name?" "Edward Frank Jones." The lady repeated. "Any problems?" A shiver ran down Jack's spine as he stared at the beggar before him, trying to process the shocking revelation. His father, whom he had lost all hope of finding, was there, at that unexpected moment, looking at him with love and sadness in his eyes. "You, madam, are you sure of that?" "Sure, you can look here." And at the sight of the photo, the name, tears flowed freely. He hugged Frank tightly, lost in a whirlwind of long-suppressed emotions. And although his father did not quite understand what was happening, he still accepted that hug as one who accepts a gift. Jack wept copiously on his father's shoulders, while the ladies looked at him without understanding what was happening. When Jack finally calmed down and was able to explain, the ladies gaped at the togetherness that fate brought. Jack returned home to his father and was incredulous when she received the news, as were Jack's siblings who came to New York at the same time. Jack cared for his father, who was becoming increasingly debilitated by Alzheimer's, but was with him until the end of his life. Thank you very much to those who have supported the channel financially through the link in the comment pinned. This helps me to bring more and more stories to you. And don't forget to like and also subscribe to continue receiving the new stories.